Blood dripped from the Wobby's jaws, its massive shadow black frame towering over the trembling girl in the center of the arena. This was the Alpha King's ultimate weapon, a monstrous ancient direwolf that bowed to no one, not even the king himself. Without the threat of a civil war, the entire pack held their breath, waiting for the inevitable, sickening snap of bone. But the crunch never came. Instead, the beast lowered its massive head, scraping its snout against the blood-soaked dirt, and whimpered softly. It folded its front legs and bowed to the bruised mite, holding a serving tray. The arena plunged into a deafening, towering silence. A scent of bleach and stale copper was permanently etched into Norah Hastings' skin. No matter how hard she scrubbed her hands with the harsh, light-based soap provided in the servants' quarters, the phantom smell of the fighting pits clung to her. She was 21 years old, but her body as with the exhaustion of a woman 3 times her age in the Iron Ridge Pack, the largest and most ruthless werewolf syndicate in the Northern Hemisphere. Being an Omega wasn't just a run. It was a life sentence of invisible servitude. Norah dipped her heavy bristle brush into the bucket of steaming, chemically treated water and dropped to her hands and knees on the cold, unforgiving stone of the arena floor. The midday sun beat down to the massive iron grate above, casting grid-like shadows across the dried bloodstains she was tasked with removing. Her knees, wrapped in rags that offered dull padding, screamed in protest. Mr. Spock. Hastings, a sharp, sneering voice, echoed through the empty amphitheater. Norah didn't need to look up to know it was Serafina first. Serafina was the daughter of the park's late financier, a high-ranking Delta female with a cruelty that matched her flawless, icy beauty. She stood at the edge of the pit, flanked by 2 of her sycophantic friends, tossing a handful of sunflower seeds into the freshly scrubbed section Norah had just finished. "Clean it up," Serafina demanded, a cool smile playing on her lips. "The Alpha King returns from the Bolo Wars tonight. The Solstice Gala is tomorrow, and the arena must be immaculate for the executions. If Damien sees a single speck of filth, I'll make sure your rations are cut for a month." Norah gritted her teeth, keeping her head bowed. "Yes, Lady Serafina." She crawled over to the seeds, picking them up one by one with freezing wet fingers. She couldn't afford a ration cut. Not with Toby. Her 7-year-old little brother was currently huddled beneath thin blankets in their drafty basement room, battling a chest infection that refused to clear. Since their parents had been killed in a rogue ambush 5 years ago, leaving behind a massive debt to the pack for their funeral rites and medical care, Norah had borne the weight of their survival alone. Omegas weren't allowed by doctors. They were allowed to work, pay off their debts, then die quietly. As Serafina's mocking laughter faded down the corridor, Norah sat back on her heels and wiped the sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of grey soot across her pale skin. A sudden, earth-shattering roar vibrated through the stone floor, rattling the heavy metal bucket beside her. Norah froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Deep beneath the arena, in the subterranean holding cells fortified with titanium and silver-laced concrete, the beast was awake. No one knew exactly what Craigare was. He wasn't a werewolf. When Alpha King Damien Cross had decimated the rival northern packs 3 years ago, he had found the beast chained in a subterranean glacial cave. Keta was a remnant of something ancient. A massive quadruple night map of muscle, matted black fur, and razor-sharp bone spurs protruding from his spine. He was the size of a draft horse, with jaws that could snap a grown werewolf in half with a single bite. Damien had claimed the beast as his own, a living symbol of his absolute terrifying dominance. Another roar shook the foundations. The sound was filled with a primal rage that made Norah's wolf a small repressed thing deep inside her whimper in absolute terror. "He smells the blood," a low gruff voice said. Norah turned to see Peter Jackson Ward standing at the entrance of the tunnel. Unlike the other high-ranking members, Jackson rarely went out of his way to torment the Omegas, though his indifference was just as cold. He was staring at the floor, his jaw tight. "The Alpha King approaches the gates," Jackson announced, his eyes finally drifting to Norah. He took in a soft, ragged clothing and the exhaustion painting dark circles under her hazel eyes. "Finish this sector and get out of sight, Hastings. The king is bringing the beast up to the surface to acclimate him before tomorrow's festival. You don't want to be in the crosshairs when quick gas sees the sky." Norah nodded quickly, her hands trembling as she grabbed her brush. "Yes, Beta Jackson." Right away she scrubbed furiously, her muscles burning. The stories of the Alpha King were the stuff of nightmares among the servant class. Damien Cross had inherited the throne at 25 after his father was poisoned by a rival alpha. In the 3 Isins, Damian had eradicated his enemies with a brutal, calculating efficiency. He was known as the Iron King, unmated, unyielding, and completely devoid of mercy. It was heavily rumored that during the Solstice Gala tomorrow he would finally choose Aluna to secure his lineage, and Serafina Frost was the loudest, most aggressive candidate for the crown. Norah finished the last of the bloodstain and hauled her heavy bucket toward the servant's exit. Just as she reached the heavy iron door, she heard the colossal grinding gears of the main arena gates opening. Against her better judgment, she paused, peering through the small rusted grate in the door. A professional Mbohoi token little warriors marched in. Their faces brimmed, pulling on massive chains thick as a man's arm. At the center of the formation was Damian Cross, even from a distance. The sheer aura of his power was suffocating. He was tall, powerfully built, dressed in dark combat gear that sit with the edge of the borderlands. His dark hair was swept back and his jaw was set in a hard, unforgiving line. But it was what he led that stole the breath from Norah's lungs. Cracked off, the beast emerged from the shadows of the town, fighting the chains with every step. The creature was monstrous, its eyes glowing in a sickly radioactive amber. It snapped its jaws, the sound like a steel trap slamming shut, taking a chunk out of a stone pillar as if it were made of chalk. The alley got strained, their boots skidding on the stone. But Damien held the primary chain wrapped around his heavily gloved hand. With a sharp, violent yank, the FAQ forced the beast's head down. Hill. Damien's voice boomed, a deep, commanding alpha frequency that forced Norah to her knees behind the door, her hands flying to her ears to block the overwhelming psychic pressure. Kegia snarled, saliva dripping from his fangs, but he ceased his thrashing, blabbering at the Alpha King with barely contained murderous intent. Norah did wait to see more. Terrified, she scrambled to her feet and fled down the damp, dimly lit corridor toward the servants' quarters. She had to get back to Toby. The presence of the Alpha King and his monster meant the pack was entirely focused on the upper levels, which meant she might be able to sneak into the infirmary's waste bins to find discarded antibiotics for her brother. In the brutal world of the Iron Ridge pack, survival wasn't about strength for a Mamega. It was about remaining entirely, perfectly invisible. The Solstice Gala was a sickening display of excess. While the Omegas survived on watery potato stew and stale bread, the grand balconies of the arena were laden with roasted meats, exotic fruits flown in from the coast, and fountains of sparkling wine. The dire pack of 2,000 wolves had gathered in the tiered seating surrounding the massive stone fighting pit. Torches blazed, casting long dancing shadows across the cheering crowd. Norah was exhausted to the point of collapse. She had been on her feet for 18 hours, carrying massive silver trays of food to the VIP tables on the lower balcony right above the pit. Her uniform, a simple gray linen dress, clung to her damp skin. More wine on Mala. A drunken warrior barked, slamming a silver goblet on the table. Norah hurried over, her hands shaking as she poured the heavy red liquid. She kept her eyes glued to the floor, actively ignoring the snares, and whispered insults from the highborn wolves. At the head of the balcony sat the Alpha King's throne. Damien Cross sat with a posture of absolute authority, though his sharp dark eyes betrayed a deep-seated boredom and irritation. He held a glass of whiskey, watching the festivities with the detached coldness of a predator. To his right stood Serafina Frost, dressed in a stunning blood-red silk gown that clung to her curves. She was leaning in close to him, laughing loudly at something he hadn't even said, desperate to cement the public illusion that she was his chosen mate. Damien, however, barely looked at her. His gaze kept drifting to the massive iron cage sitting in the center of the arena below. His sidequarter paced relentlessly, his massive paws completely silent on the stone. "My king," Beta Jackson's voice cut through the noise as he stepped onto the royal platform. "The rope prisoners have been prepped. The crowd is getting merciless. Shall we begin the execution?" Damien took a slow sip of his whiskey. "Let them loose 3 at a time. Let's see the beast is still hungry." Norah shivered, stepping back against the stone wall of the balcony to make herself as small as possible. She hated this part of the festival. She hated the violence, the cheering, the smell of death that would linger in the stones, for which stone she would have to scrub tomorrow. Down in the arena, the heavy iron portcullis lifted. Three mobs, feral bulls who had been caught trying to infiltrate the boulders were shoved into the pit. They were fully shifted into their wolf forms, snarling and desperate, their eyes darting around for an exit. There was none. With a loud metallic clank, the cage in the center of the arena fell open. Kaiger didn't run. The rope stepped out slowly, his amber eyes locking onto the three wolves. He was twice their size, a walking nightmare of muscle and bone. The crowd erupted into a bloodthirsty straw. Norah closed her eyes, trying to block out the sun, but a sharp shove to her shoulder sent her stumbling forward. "What were you standing? Trash!" Serafina hissed, and he stepped away from the king's table to grab a fresh glass of champagne. She glared at Norah with absolute disdain. "You're blocking this view." "Oh, I apologize, Lady Serafina," Norah whispered, bowing her head and trying to step back. But Serafina wasn't dumb. Annoyed by Damien's lack of attention, she needed a target for her frustration. As Norah tried to move past her with a tray of empty crystal glasses, Serafina subtly jutted her high-heeled foot out. Norah tripped, sheepish forward, crying out as the heavy silver tray flew from her hands. The crystal glasses shattered spectacularly against the stone floor of the balcony, sending a shower of sharp shards in every direction. The loud crash pulled the attention of the surrounding tables. The music seemed to stutter. "You clumsy, worthless!" Serafina shrieked, dramatically brushing non-existent glass from her red dress. "She did that on purpose. She tried to throw glass at me." Damon slowly turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto the commotion. Norah was on her hands and knees, frantically trying to sweep up the broken glass with her bare hands, blood already welling from shallow cuts on her palms. I'm so sorry. I cheat. You trip because you are incompetent." Serafina spat. She turned to one of the massive guards standing near the balcony ledge. "Throw her over. Let her in the pit from the inside." The guard hesitated, looking to the Alpha King for confirmation. Damien simply watched, his expression unreadable, though muscle in his jaw teeth. He didn't care about a clumsy servant, nor did he care about Serafina's petty tantrums. He remained silent, taking the Alpha's silence as permission. The guard stepped forward and grabbed Norah by the back of her uniform. "No, please!" Norah screamed, her voice cracking with terror as her feet left the ground. She thought of Toby, lying sick in his bed. If she died, he would starve. "Please, my brother. I have a brother." The crowd laughed, the sun cruel and jagged. Below, the fight was already over. Kaiser stood over the mangled remains of the three rogues, his muzzle dripping with dark blood. The beast whipped his massive head upward, alerted by Norah's scream. With a heave, the guard tossed Norah over the low stone wall of the balcony. She fell 15 feet, her body hitting the packed dirt, and blood of the arena flowed with a sickening thud. The wind was violently knocked from her lungs. Pain exploded in her shoulder and ribs. She gasped for air, her vision swimming with dark spots, the taste of copper flooding her mouth. The cheers of the crowd abruptly morphed into excited, frenzied shrieking. They had a new piece of entertainment. Norah forced her eyes open, coughing as she tried to push herself up. 10 yards away, toward Bistam, entirely away from his kills. His glowing amber eyes locked onto her small, broken form. Kragna let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the earth, shaking the very marrow in Norah's bones. On the balcony, the main cross suddenly stood up. The moment Norah had hit the ground, a scent had drifted up into the night air. It wasn't a metallic tongue of fear or the sourness of the rogues. It was the scent of rain-washed pan, sweet vanilla, something electric that made the Alpha King's heart violently slam against his ribs. His smooth, torment, and ruthlessly controlled for years suddenly flashed wildly against his spirit cage, howling a single, desperate word into his mind. Mate Drummond's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated shock, locking onto the bleeding girl in the dirt, the Omega. And then Gregor charged her. The beast moved with a terrifying speed. A blur of black shadow and Lisa muscle tearing across the arena. Các câu điều hát dạng lệnh, vì trộm này dô cổ. The Alpha King's voice boomed with such staggering dominance that several wolves in the front rows collapsed, clutching their heads in pain. It was a command meant to bend their reality to his will. But Gaga was not a werewolf. He did not operate on the Pack's psychic network. He was a creature of blood and instinct, and his bloodlust was fully ignited. He ignored the king entirely, covering the distance to Norah in seconds. Norah couldn't run. Her shoulder was dislocated from the floor, hanging uselessly at her side. She looked up at the towering monster bearing down on her, its jaws unhinged, revealing rows of serrated blood-stained teeth. Toby, she thought, tears finally spilling hot and fast down her dirty cheeks. I'm so sorry, Toby. She didn't scream. She didn't cower. She simply closed her eyes, wrapping her good arm around her ribs and waited for the dark. Damien vaulted over the balcony. He didn't care about the job. He didn't care about the thousands of eyes watching him. His fangs descended, his claws elongating as he hit the dirt, sprinting toward the beast with a speed that defied logic. But he was too far. He wasn't going to make it. No, the man bellowed, a sound of pure agonizing despair. Kaga leaped into the air, a shadow blotting out the torches, descending directly upon Norah. But the teeth never tore into her flesh. A foot away from her face, Krieger slammed his front paws into the dirt. Weighing so high, he kicked up a massive cloud of dust and blood-soaked sand. The momentum carried him forward until his giant snout was mere inches from Norah's trembling face. The arena fell dead silent. The cheers evaporated. The music died. 2,000 wolves froze in utter disbelief. Norah squeezed her eyes shut tighter, feeling the hot, wet breath of the monster washing over her face, smelling the raw stench of the slaughtered robes. She trembled violently, waiting. Carvindian, he pressed his wet nose against her neck, right over her pulse point. He inhaled deeply, a loud snuffling sound that echoed in the silent amphitheater. He sniffed the hair, the tears, the faint scent of the cheap lice soup, and the ancient, hidden bloodline buried deep within her DNA. Then the impossible happened. The monstrous war beast, the creature that had torn through entire armies and refused to yield to the most powerful alpha in the hemisphere, let out a soft, high-pitched whine. Krieger took a step back. He lowered his massive, terrifying head until his chin scraped the dirt. He folded his front legs, bowing his upper body entirely to the ground, his ears pinned back flat against his skull. And he nudged Norah's broken, bleeding hand with his nose, licking the blood from her knuckles with surprising, terrifying gentleness. He was submitting to her. The silence in the arena was absolute. It was a suffocating, heavy quiet, broken only by the cracking of the torches. Up on the balcony, Seraphina Frost's jaw hung completely slack, her champagne glass slipping from her fingers and shattering on the stone. Damon skidded to a halt 10 feet away. His chest heaved, his eyes wide, his alpha aura flaring uncontrollably. He stared at the beast bowing in the dirt, and then his gaze shifted to the tiny, terrified Omega curled up on the ground. Norah slowly opened her hazel eyes. She stared at the giant black wolf pressing its head into the dirt before her. Her breathing was shallow, jagged. She hesitantly reached out her injured, shaking hand and let her fingers graze the coarse, dark fur of the beast's snout. Creature rumbled, a deep purr that vibrated the ground, and closed his glowing amber eyes, leaning into her touch. The man took a slow, deliberate step forward. The sheer intensity rolling of him made the air crackle with static electricity. Who are you? Davian's voice was barely a whisper, yet he carried through the silent arena like a gunshot. Norah looked up at the alpha king. Up close, he was terrifying. His eyes were entirely pitch black, his wolf completely pushed to the surface, driven mad by the scent of his mate bleeding in the dirt. I am Norah, she whispered, her voice cracking. Please don't kill me. Damien didn't look at Krieger. He didn't look at the thousands of pack members watching in stunned horror. He dropped to his knees in the dirt right beside, uncaring of the blood staining his dark trousers. He reached out, his massive, calloused hands hovering over her broken body as if terrified she was an illusion that would shatter if he touched her. Kill you! Dama breathed, his voice rough. Secrets and emotion no one in Yarishbach had ever heard from their ruthless king. He gently touched her cheek, wiping away a stick of dirt and tears with his thumb. A jolt of electricity snapped between their skin, making Norah gasp. You are my mate, Damien declared, his voice rising, carrying the absolute, undeniable weight of Alfana. He stood up, scooping her fragile, broken body into his arms with terrifying gentleness. Norah cried out softly as her dislocated shoulder shifted. Damien turned his blazing pitch-black eyes toward the royal balcony, locking his gaze directly onto Seraphina Frost and the guard who had thrown Norah over the edge. And whoever laid a hand on my queen, Damien's voice dropped to a lethal demonic register, would not live to see the sunrise. Krieger, standing up behind them, let out a massive blood-curdling roar of agreement, stepping protectively behind the bleeding Omega in the Alpha's arms. The solstice color was over. The bloodbath was just beginning. The air in the arena would their coasting teeth stifled by the clashing, suffocating weight of Damien Cross's alpha aura. It was a tangible force, a pressure that forced the weaker wolves in the upper balconies to their knees. Gasping for breath, he stood in the blood-soaked dirt of the pit, holding Norah Hastings against his chest as if she were made of spun glass. Her head rested weakly against his armor, her breathing shallow and ragged. The searing pain in her dislocated right shoulder was nauseating, but the terrifying warmth radiating from the Alpha King was overriding her shock. Sparks of electricity, the undeniable biological signature of the mating bond, danced across her skin wherever he touched her. Brandok Bayman's voice was a low, terrifying rumble that carried perfectly in the dead silence. On the royal balcony, the massive guard who had thrown Norah over the edge visibly flinched, the color completely drained from his face. He stepped back, his hands raised in a futile gesture of surrender. "My king, I was only following Lady Seraphina's orders. The Omega was insubordinate. She threw glass." "You threw my queen into a pit of death," the man interrupted, his tone devoid of any emotion. "It was the absolute calm before a catastrophic storm. You took orders from a delta when your oath was sworn to me." Damon didn't even raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply shifted his gaze to Beta Jackson Ward, who was already leaping down the stone tiers toward the balcony. "Take him," Damien commanded softly. "Ante Seraphina first. Throw them in the subterranean holding cells, the ones lined with silver." Panic erupted. Seraphina let out a piercing shriek as two of Jackson's initiating forces grabbed her by the arms, dragging her away from the valet-lined VIP tables. "Get your hands off me," Seraphina screamed, her flawless facade shattering into absolute hysteria. "Damien, you can't do this. My father is Moror of Frost. He finances your entire border defense. You cannot cage me for filthy worthless." Her words were violently cut off as Jackson Ward casually backhanded her across the face, silencing her instantly. "You will not speak of the Luna that way," Jackson growled, hauling her to the heavy iron doors. Radolf, for God, didn't even fight. He simply wept, knowing his execution was only a certainty. In the pit, Norah let out a sharp curse, her fingers touching the dark fabric of Damien's shirt. Her vision was blurring at the edges, the shock of the fall finally taking its toll on her malnourished body. "Shh, I have you," the man whispered, his terrifying demeanor instantly softening as he looked down at her. His pitch-black eyes were slowly receding back to their natural piercing ice blue. "I'm getting you out of here. The park doctor is waiting." "No," Norah choked out, tears mixing with the soot on her face. She fought to keep her eyes open, terrified that if she passed out, her reality would reset to the nightmare of her daily life. "No, Doctor. Please, Toby. I have to get to Toby." Damien stopped walking toward the exit gates, his brows furrowed in confusion. "Where's Toby?" "My brother," Norah wastes every word, sending a spike of agony through her ribs. "He's 7. He's in the basement. Sector D, room 4. The servant quarters. He has a lung infection. He's burning up. Please don't leave him down there. If I'm not there, you'll die." The sheer desperation in her voice felt like a physical knife twisting in Damien's gut. His mate, his Luna, the most revered position in the pack hierarchy, was begging for the life of a child living in a damp, disease-ridden basement right beneath his feet. A wave of profound, sickening guilt washed over him. He had been so consumed by the border walls and maintaining his ruthless reputation that he had allowed his own pack to rot from the inside out. Jack wasn't Damien the Horde, hurting the beta at the tunnel entrance. "Deploy a medical extraction team to Sector D, room 4 immediately. There is a child named Toby. I want him brought to the Royal Infirmary, and I want Dr. Harrison Gable waiting for us." Now Jackson nodded sharply, tapping his earpiece to issue a command before vanishing into the shadows. Damien adjusted Norah in his arms, securing her broken frame against him. "He's going to be safe, Norah. I swear it on my life." As Damien strode toward the heavy steel gates of the arena, a massive shadow fell over them. Kaija, the ancient war beast, stepped into stride right beside Damien, his giant, muscular shoulder brushing against the Alpha King's arm. Kavita's glowing amber eyes were locked onto Norah, a low, protective rumble vibrating in his chest. Any pack member who even breathed too loudly as they passed was met with a terrifying bone-chilling snarl from the monster. The entire average pack watched his stunned-absolute silence as their ruthless team carried the bleeding, soot-covered servant out of the arena, flanked by the deadliest creature on earth. The hierarchy they had known for centuries had just been obliterated in a matter of minutes. The oil infirmary was a stark contrast to the damp, chemical-smelling ward Norah had inhabited for the last 5 years. It smelled of clean linen, high-grade antiseptic, and expensive essential oils meant to soothe the wound's heightened senses. The lighting was soft, and the medical equipment handled with state-of-the-art precision. Norah lay on a plush, heated medical bed, the right arm secured in a high-tech stabilizing sling. Dr. Hassan Gable, a stern-looking man in his late 50s, with graying hair and a meticulously trimmed beard, had just popped her shoulder back into place. The pain had been blinding, but Damon hadn't let go of her left hand for a single second. He sat beside her bed, having completely discarded his royal armor. He wore only a simple black undershirt, his muscular arms resting on the mattress as he kept his eyes locked on her pained face. The dislocation is clean and there's no severe internal bleeding from the fall. Thankfully, Dr. Gable murmured, checking the monitors above her bed. She is severely malnourished. However, your bone density is frighteningly low and her immune system is compromised. It's a miracle she survived the impact at all. Damon's jaw clenched so hard, a muzzle feathered in his cheek. He gently brushed a stray, damp curl from Norah's forehead. Fix it, Harrison, whatever she needs. I don't care what it costs. Before the doctor could reply, the heavy automated doors of the infirmary hissed open. 2 elite medical personnel rushed in, pushing a gurney. Vying on it was a tiny frail boy, his face flushed red with fever, coughing weakly into an oxygen mask. "Ruby!" Norah cried out, tried to sit up, and Damon gently pushed her back down by her good shoulder. "Stay still, little wolf," Damon urged sturdily. "Let the doctors work." Dr. Geber immediately moved to the boy's side, running a scanner over his small chest. "Severe bilateral pneumonia," the doctor announced grimly, pulling out a syringe of potent syphilis antibiotics specifically designed for werewolf biology. This poor feathered man manifested yet to fight the infection. If he had waited another 24 hours to tell us my king, he would not have made it. Norah covered her mouth with her good hand, tears streaming down her face as she watched the nurses cook her brother up to IV fluids and monitors. The crushing weight of a 5-year struggle was finally lifting, replaced by an overwhelming, confusing reality. "Why are we doing this?" Norah whispered, looking up at Damien. Her hazel eyes were wide, filled with a lifetime of distrust. "I'm just a servant. I have debts." "Our parents owed the pack. Your parents owed nothing," Damien interrupted, his voice fiercely protective. "The old laws created by my father were designed to enslave the weak. I was blind to how deep the road went. You are my mate, Norah. You are the other half of my soul. There are no debts. There is only you and whatever you require." He leaned down, pressing a gentle, lingering kiss to her knuckles. The warmth of his lips sent a rush of comfort straight to her exhausted heart. For the first time in her life, Norah felt entirely unequivocal, he says. "Althea, Doctor, Bubba." Cable's voice broke the quiet intimacy of the room. The doctor was standing by the genomics sequencer in the corner of the lab, holding a digital tablet. His face was completely drained of color, his eyes darting frantically between the screen and Norah. Cable stood up, his protective instincts instantly flaying. "What is it, Harrison? Did you find something in her blood work?" Dr. Cable swallowed hard, walking over to the bed with trembling hands. "I ran a standard genetic panel to ensure she had the biological markers to handle the mating bond with an alpha of your magnitude. But the sequencer flagged an anomaly, a massive one." "Speak plainly," Damien growled. "Is patience wearing thin?" "She isn't an Omega, Doctor," Dabo breathed, turning the tablet to show Damien the complex double helix rendering on the screen. The DNA strands were highlighted in a brilliant, unusual gold. Her recessive genes, the match a sequence we thought was entirely eradicated during the First Age. "My king, her genetic markers belong to the Valkyrie lineage." Damien froze. The air in the womb seemed to drop 10 degrees. "That's impossible. The Volta line was wiped out centuries ago in the Nordic fjords. They were the original royalty, the first shifters." "I ran it 3 times," Dr. Gable insisted, his voice hushed with absolute awe. He looked at Norah as if she were a living deity. "The markers are undeniable. The Vats ones weren't just alphas. They had the psychic teller to the ancient beasts of the earth. They were the only ones who could command them without force." Damien slowly turned his head, looking through the reinforced glass window of the infirmary doors. Sitting in the middle of the sterile white hallway, taking up almost the entire corridor, was Krieger. The war beast was sitting perfectly still, guarding the door like a loyal hound. "That's why Cracker bowed," Damien whispered, the realization hitting him with the force of a freight train. He didn't smell Anumageda in the dark. He smelled his true master. He smelled the ancient blood. Norah looked between the two men, utterly lost. "I don't understand. My payments were normal. We were just workers. They must have been in hiding," Damien murmured, walking back to her side and sitting down heavily. "The Volpert blood is a threat to every reigning alpha in the world. If the other syndicates find out that the true Vogue other heir exists, they won't just challenge me for territory. They will start dual war to either claim you or kill you." Before the weight of that revelation could fully settle, the infirmary door slid open and Beta Jackson Ward stepped inside, his expression dark and severe. He completely ignored the usual protocols, walking straight up to Damien. "We have a massive problem, Alpha," Jackson said, keeping his voice low so the nurses wouldn't hear. "I told you to put Serafina in the silver seals," Damien said, his eyes narrowing. "I did," Jackson replied. "But Maro Frost just breached the armory. He's rallied the Delta class and the financial sector guards. He's locked down the Pax bank accounts and is barricading the southern wing." Damien's jaw locked. "A coup. He claims you've been bewitched by an Omega witch." Jackson explained grimly. "He says he refuses to let his daughter rot in a cell while you put a servant on the throne. He's demanding we hand Noah over for execution, or he will bank up the Iron Reach back and open our borders to the rogue armies." Damien looked down at Norah. She was trembling again, her eyes darting toward the sleeping brother. The peace she had felt for 5 minutes was already shattering. A dark, terrifying smile slowly spread across Damien's face. His eyes flashed pitch black, the alpha beast roaring to the surface. Ready for slaughter, he reached down and gently cut Norah's cheek. "Rest my Luna," Damien whispered, his thumb brushing her jaw. "Keep her safe, Henderson. If anyone besides Jackson enters this room, you have my permission to use lethal force." Damien turned and walked toward the heavy glass doors. As they slid open, Kicker stood up, his massive bone spurs bristling, sensing the violence radiating from the Alpha King. "Jackson," the man said, not looking back as he stepped into the hallway. "Tell Maro Frost he has exactly 10 minutes to surrender his forces and his life, or I won't just kill him. I'll let the beast eat him." The southern wing of the Iron Ridge compound was an architectural fortress designed specifically to protect the syndicate's massive wealth and armory. It boasted reinforced titanium doors, biometric scanners, and a localized security completely detached from the main network. Moho, a ruthless man in his late 50s with silver hair and a tailored charcoal suit, stood behind the primary barricade. He was flanked by 40 heavy-armed Delta guards, all holding state-of-the-art rifles loaded with silver nitrate rounds. Maro was pacing frantically, clutching a secure concocted tablet. He was not a warrior, he was a financier. He had spent his life manipulating global markets, funneling the Pax wealth through offshore accounts at Barclays, and routing untraceable funds through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. He believed that money, not blood, ruled the world. "Hold the parimida," Mara barked, his voice echoing in the cavernous marble hallway of the financial sector. "Cattle Randolph, ensure that Thomas sensors are active. Is the Alpha King tries to breach the ventilation, shoot to kill. I will not let that arrogant boy destroy decades of wealth over a filthy servant." Captain Reynolds, a bottom-hardened Delta whose loyalty had been bought with a hefty offshore deposit, adjusted his grip on his rifle. "Sir, with all due respect, it's Damien Cross, and the scouts reported that he has the war beast off its chains." "It's an animal," Reynolds Maro spat, his composure cracking. "A massive Daman animal. Silver would put it down just like any other dog. I've already contacted the regional directors at Standard Chartered. I've frozen the Iron Ridge operational funds. Damien cannot pay his border armies. By money he will be begging me on his knees, and that Omega witch will be dead." A low, rhythmic thundering suddenly echoed down the exterior corridor. It wasn't the sound of marching boots. It was the heavy tapir-frame footfalls of something massive. The foremost sensors on the security monitors flickered, then completely whited out, overwhelmed by an immense heat signature approaching the titanium blast doors. Maro stopped pacing. The 40 guards raised their weapons, the collective click of safety's indizing sounding like a death rattle in the tense silence. "He's here," Reynolds whispered, a bead of sweat tracing down his scarred cheek. Outside the barricade, Demanclos stood with his hands casually shoved into the pockets of his dark trousers. He didn't bring his elite forces. He didn't bring Bader Jackson. He brought only himself and Quega. The Alpha King looked up massive 2-foot thick platinum doors. He could hear the rapid, terrified heartbeats of the deltas inside. He could smell the sour acid fear leaking through the airtight seals. Mal, Damien's voice was barely louder than a conversational tone. Yet the alpha frequencies cut straight to the reinforced steel, vibrating directly into the skulls of the men inside. I gave you 10 minutes. You've fed 8 of them, sweetie. He sighed, Barrow snatched the localized PI microphone. Stand down, Damien. You are outmatched. I hold the purse strings of this entire syndicate. I have frozen the backless accounts and halted the logistic supply chain. Surrender the Omega to me. Reinstate my daughter and I will restore your empire. Damien let out a dark, humorless chuckle that sent a shiver down the spine of every guard. You think you hog my empire, Mano? Damien replied, his voice dropping into a lethal demonic register. My empire is not built on fiat currency or offshore accounts. It is built on blood. It is built on absolute undeniable power. And you just threatened my queen. Damien took a step back, casually gesturing to the massive blast doors. He didn't look at the beast beside them. He simply gave a single quiet command. Open it, Criteria. The Wobbies let out a deafening roar that shook dust from the vaulted ceilings. Kaika didn't charge the doors. He reared up on his hind legs, his massive shadow black frame towering 15 feet in the air, and slammed his front paws directly into the center of the titanium. The sound of the impact was catastrophic. The 2 feet thick metal buckled inward with a shrieking groan. The structural integrity of the fortress, designed to withstand the direct missile strike, fell instantly under the ancient unnatural physical force of the beast. Quaker drove his razor-sharp, bone-crushing claws into the of the doors. Muscles the size of boulders bulged beneath his matted black fur as he wrenched his massive shoulders apart. Inside the barricade, Captain Reynolds screamed as the titanium doors were literally ripped off the hinges. One of the massive steel slabs flew through the air, completely obliterating the defensive sandbags and crushing 3 guards instantly. Queja stepped into the breach. His glowing amber eyes swept over the terrified deltas, his jaws unhinged, saliva dripping onto the marble floor. Fire! Fire! Maru shrieked, dropping his tablet and backing away. Dozens of silver nitrate rounds tore through the air, striking Krieger's chest and shoulders. But the beast wasn't a werewolf. The shield didn't burn. It merely annoyed him. The bullets flattened against his impenetrable hide and dropped uselessly to the floor. Kalongjit, he didn't kill them. Damien hadn't ordered a massacre, but Claire's throat. He swatted Captain Reynolds across the room with a single brutal flick of his paw, sending the man crashing into a concrete pillar unconscious. The beasts of all paralyzed the remaining guards. Their wounds whimpered his submission, forcing the men to drop their weapons and fall to their knees, pressing their foreheads to the marble floor in absolute primal terror. Damien stepped slowly through the ruined doorway, stepping over the shattered titanium. Clear's road. The air around him was so heavy with alpha dominance that the marble floor literally cracked beneath his boots. Mara Frost was backed into a corner, his tailored suit ruined by dust, his hand shaking violently as he stared at the Alpha King and the monster towering behind him. Please, Maru choked out, all of his arrogance evaporating. Please, Alpha, the accounts, I can unfreeze them. I can transfer the Cayman assets back to the central trust. Just name your price. Damien stopped 3 feet away from the cowering financier. His ice blue eyes were utterly devoid of mercy. My price, Damien said softly, is your life. Before Mao could scream, Damon's hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around the man's throat, lifting him entirely off the ground. Maro kicked and thrust, his face turning a mottled purple. You are stripped of your rank. You are stripped of your wealth, Damien growled, his fangs descending slightly. Every asset you hold will be liquidated and distributed to the Omega class. You and your daughter will spend the rest of your miserable lives in the silver-lined subterranean cells. If you ever speak my mate's name again, I will let her gear have your spine for a chew toy. Damien tossed the man aside like a piece of garbage. Maru hit the wall and collapsed, gasping for air, utterly broken. Jackson called out over his shoulder. Peter Jackson Ward stepped to the rubble, flanked by a dozen elite forces who looked at the destruction with wide, terrified eyes. Lindsay's up, Damien nodded, adjusting his cuffs. Secure the perimeter and send the message to the palace regional director. Tell them the Iron Bridge Count are under your management. If they hesitate, tell them the Alpha King will pay them a personal visit. Without waiting for a response, Damien turned and walked back out of the ruins fortress he had made to return to. 3 days passed. The Iron Ridge Pack had undergone a seismic terrifying shift. The Sorcerer's collapse, bloody conclusion, and the immediate brutal crushing of the Delta Rebellion had sent shock waves through the entire syndicate. The Omegas, previously invisible and abused, were suddenly elevated, moved from the damp basement into the sunny, newly renovated eastern wing. Maros liquidated as it funded top-tier medical care, better food, and proper wages. But the pack was incredibly restless. They had an Omega on the front, or so they thought. They hadn't seen Norah since Daimyo carried her from the arena. In the royal penthouse high above the compound, Norah stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror. She was barely recognizable. Suit and grime were gone, her skin glowing with a newfound health, though she remained slender. Her right arm was still secured in a sleek carbon fiber sling, but her posture had changed. The crushing weight of survival had been lifted, replaced by a strange humming energy deep in her blood. She wore a simple, elegant emerald green dress that brought out the gold flag socks in her hazel eyes. Damien stood behind her, his large hands resting gently on her waist. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling her sweet vanilla and rain-washed pine scent, placing a soft kiss against her mating mark, a crescent-shaped scar he had claimed her with the night before, sealing their bond. "You're shaking, Taman," Cliff's throat murmured, his voice a soothing rumble against her skin. "I'm terrified, Taman," Norah admitted, leaning back against his solid chest. "The tactic will explain the vulgar bloodline to me. I understand what it means, but the pack, they still see me as the girl scrubbing blood off the arena floor. They won't accept me just because you command it." Damien turned around gently, looking deeply into her eyes. "They will accept you because you are a queen, Norah. Not just by my side, but by your own divine right. The blood in your veins commanded the beast that slaughtered armies. You don't need to demand their respect. You just need to show them who you are." A sharp knock on the heavy oak doors interrupted them. Peter Jackson stepped inside, his face grim. Alpha Luna Jackson bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect that still made Norah blush. "We have a situation at the main gates. Alpha Kalinkov of the Blood Moose Syndicate has arrived unannounced. He brought a vanguard of 200 elite warriors. He claims he heard rumors that the servant tamed your beast. He says if the Iron Ridge Pack is weak enough to put an Omega on the throne, he is here to challenge you for the Northern Territory." Damien's jaw clenched, his eyes instantly flashing a dangerous black. "Croft has been looking for an excuse to cross the border for 2 years. Tell these snipers to lock onto his vanguard. I will rip his throat out in the courtyard." "No, no," said. The single word was spoken softly, but it carried a strange echoing resonance that made both Damien and Jackson freeze. Norah stepped away from Damien, her hazel eyes suddenly swirling with a faint luminous gold. The dormant power of the bloodline, awakened by the meeting bite, was finally rising to the surface. "Isn't here for you, Damien," Norah said, her voice steady, completely devoid of the fear that had ruled her life just days ago. "He's here because he smells a shift in power. If you kill him, his pack will retaliate. It would be a bloodbath. I won't let my first act as Luna be a war." Damien looked at his mate, utterly captivated by the fierce regal aura radiating from her small frame. "What do you want to do, my queen?" "Let him in," Norah commanded, looking at Jackson. "Bring him to the central courtyard. I will meet him." 10 minutes later, the center courtyard was completely silent. Thousands of Iron Ridge wolves lined the balconies, watching intensely. Alpha Kalim Croft, the massive, heavily scarred man with a brutal reputation, stood in the center of the cobblestones, flanked by his highest-ranking enforcers. The heavy oak doors of the royal keep opened. Damien stepped out first, but he did not take the lead. He stepped to the side, allowing Norah to walk out ahead of him. She walked slowly, her chin held high, the emerald dress flowing around her ankles, and right beside her, walking perfectly in sync with her steps, was Gregor. The wobbish thing was a walking nightmare in the daylight. His bone spurs gleamed, and his massive paws struck the stones with heavy, deliberate thuds. Elspakov laughed, the harsh, mocking sound. "Is this a joke, Cross? You hide behind a broken servant girl in a chained mud." Norah didn't stop until she was 20 feet from the rival Alpha. She looked Gaylincroft directly in the eyes. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. It's not chained, Norah said, her voice carrying an ancient, terrifying authority that made the air pressure in the courtyard instantly drop. Norah slowly raised that good hand. She didn't look at Krieger. She simply released a fraction of the Volkrat energy humming in her veins. Kagon let out a roar that eclipsed anything the pack had ever heard. It wasn't just loud, it was psychic. It was a shockwave of ancient primal power that shattered glass in surrounding windows. The beast lunged forward, moving faster than the eye could track, and slammed his massive paws onto the cobblestones just inches from Alphacroft, tightening his jaws, staring down at the rival Alpha, entirely ready to bite the man in half. Croft stumbled backward, his face draining of all color. His own wolf, seizing the ancient apex predator and the divine royal bloodline radiating from the tiny woman behind the beast, completely surrendered. Against his own will, Avikalinkoff talked to his knees on the hearthstone, his hands shaking. His 200 elite warriors immediately followed, collapsing to their knees in absolute submission to the Volgrad Queen. Norah lowered her hand. Krieger snapped his jaw shut, backing up to sit loyally at her side, resting his massive head gently against her hip. The entire Iron Ridgeback, watching from the balconies, didn't cheer. They didn't roar. In complete Iraq silence, thousands of wolves dropped to one knee, bowing their heads. They finally understood. She wasn't an Omega. She was a god among wolves. Damien walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, a fiercely proud smile on his face. You have your answer, Alpharoft. Damien projected his voice over the kneeling crowd. The Northern Trolleys belong to the Iron Ridgeback, and the Iron Ridgeback belongs to the true queen. Now get off our lands. Croft scrambled to his feet, bowing hastily before fleeing with his vanguard, the threat of war completely extinguished by a single unbroken girl. Norah leaned her head back against Damen's shoulder, letting out a long, shaky breath as the adrenaline faded. Is it over? She whispered. Damon kissed her temple, his arms tightening around her. No, my love, it's just beginning. The era of cruelty within the Iron Ridgeback was buried that day. Under Norah's reign, the Syndicate transformed from a ruthless military dictatorship into a prosperous, fiercely loyal empire. The caste system was abolished, and the wealth hoarded by the Deltas was poured into education, medical research, and infrastructure. Toby recovered fully, growing into a strong, mischievous boy who often rode on the back of the terrifying war beast through the compound gardens. Maru and Sarafina Frost remained in the silver-lined cells, a permanent reminder of the price of arrogance. As for Damien, the Iron Thing finally found his peace. He no longer ruled through fear, but through the absolute and unwavering devotion he held for his mate. Norah Hastings, the broken Omega, who fell into the fighting pit, had not just tamed the war beast. She had healed that entire kingdom.